Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to what Americans don't understand about public healthcare. I'm not too sure what to expect from this. I mean, it's obviously going to be talking about healthcare, which is in the title. And it's the channel that I reacted to yesterday. And the video yesterday was the gun related video. And yeah, I reacted to it and I feel like it was quite a balanced video. Like didn't seem it was too politically either way. I mean, obviously it's political like issues and stuff, but he didn't seem like he was leaning one way or just giving informed opinions that I feel like most people can take certain things from all sides of that and understand, even if you don't necessarily agree, you know. But yeah, this is to do with this and this is to do with this. That sounds a bit stupid. And yeah, I mean, I got comments from that and people seemed like, yeah, they enjoyed the reaction. So we're going to check this one out. I don't know if this channel is the same person narrating all the time or if it's different people narrating. I'm assuming it's the same person, but I'm not sure. We're going to check this out. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more of my reactions. But let's see this video. I guess this is to do with public healthcare, so like the NHS, or you've got it in like the Scandinavian countries or throughout European countries. And to be fair, I don't really know how the healthcare is around the world. In Canada, is it free? I don't know. In somewhere like Brazil, is it free? Or Australia? I don't know about the rest of the world. I only really know about Europe and how it's free in certain parts. And maybe like places like Japan, I feel like it is. But again, I'm not sure. But we're going to check this out and learn about a lot that I probably don't know about.
Public healthcare has been a constant re-emerging topic of contention within United States politics as far back as I can remember. It is a topic of contention in the current election cycle and will in all likelihood be in future elections.
When was this video made? 3 years ago.
Again. Watching this American debate as a European living with such a healthcare system, there is however something that has always been strange to me, which is that not one proponent of such seems to have an idea of what it is, how it would work, how such a system would be built, and what it would require from everyday citizens as well as society at large. Most American proponents of public healthcare seem to get their idea of what it is and how it works from a Michael Moore movie, a movie that does an absolutely awful job at presenting the systems we have in European countries. All it really does is show us English and French doctors and nurses proclaim how superior these countries' healthcare systems are, and that's pretty much it. But there's far more to it than that. Those two countries have vastly different systems and are more on the extreme ends of what public healthcare is. Especially giving England as an example of a great public healthcare system is somewhat ridiculous.
Yeah, the NHS had a lot of problems recently, that's for sure.
Because the
it's been getting worse as well. Like they've been cutting funding and all this stuff, it's been getting a lot worse.
NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, is one of the worst healthcare services in Europe. Created during the 1950s in the post-war consensus, an age of massive centralized government organizations and public spending, the NHS was plagued from the beginning with a massive entangled bureaucracy. Detangling and reorganizing the system during the 1970s barely fixed the problems. Things were made worse under the Thatcher administration through the introduction of a management system intent on cutting back costs and increasing efficiency, and substantial damage was done to the NHS by the government of Tony Blair.
What was that stare? Like robots, man.
He believed that a public service could be run like a private company despite having no market competition. His government introduced a system of quotas and standards meant to artificially replicate market pressures. This was meant to make the overall service more efficient, but in the end accelerated its declining quality. Subsequent British governments have done little to...
Yeah, the governments have not been good for it. They're the reason why it's been like failing so bad. I mean, my girlfriend's mum, this time last year, was given the wrong antibiotics 3 different times for an infection. I don't want to give too much information, but for an infection. And all the antibiotics were wrong. They didn't do anything. And then it got really serious to the point where, what is it called when your infections, if they explode in your body, or like whatever happens in your body, it will lead to, what is it called, like a really bad shock in your body where you can literally die pretty much. And yeah, all the antibiotics didn't work, and it got to the point where she had one surgery, they couldn't remove something, and then she had a second surgery where it was a really risky surgery. We didn't know at the time how risky it was, but it was literally like a life or death situation that probably like a high percentage of the chance that it wouldn't work. And they managed to sort it out, and thank God they managed to sort it out eventually and save her life. But if she just had been given the right antibiotics, and I assume this can happen anyway, right? You can be given the wrong antibiotics. I don't know though. I can't really compare it to anywhere else. Maybe in other countries, the chances of being given the wrong antibiotics 2 or 3 times, there's no chances. And it sort of led for a month, and obviously the infection is getting bigger and bigger. And it could have been avoided if you just get the right antibiotics. So is that on the NHS, or is that just doctors who can get things wrong? I don't know, but that's just an example of how bad it can get. And also, for example, if you want, I don't know, I had a few tests for my heart over the years, and they're all fine. But on the NHS, you have to wait a good few months to get like a ECG, for example, or an X-ray scan on your chest, or I guess it's an X-ray in general. You're going to have to wait a good month, probably longer, just to get that scan. Obviously, if it's more serious, I assume it will be a lot quicker. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of drawbacks. I don't know how long it will take in somewhere like the US or, again, other countries, but I assume it's not a good few weeks to months to wait for certain things. Again, if it's more serious, it will be instant and that, but you know what I mean.
To resolve these issues. Not all is bad on the British Isles, though. In 1999, Scotland retained control over healthcare legislation from Westminster for the NHS Scotland. They avoided the Frankenstein reforms Tony Blair forced on England, created their own institutions, smaller bureaucracy, centred around 14 local health boards run by officials specific to manage these regional healthcare needs. Overall, Scotland's public healthcare performs better, and giving England as an example to Americans of how a public healthcare system is supposed to operate and work is just a giant misconception and misleading.
Scotland, I didn't know they were doing it differently. They seem to just do everything better than us. I mean, they've got free uni, so you can go to. I'm pretty sure if you're from Scotland or a Scottish citizen, you can go to any unis there, and it's completely free. Whereas in the UK, you're going to have to pay loads, like probably 30 grand per year or whatever it is. It's stupid money. Maybe not 30 grand per year. I don't actually know how much uni costs, but. And then you've got this healthcare difference as well. But we literally border each other. Like, I can get to Scotland without a passport and stuff like this. Like, it's kind of like it's not the same country, but same kind of citizenship. You can go to both places without any problems. But they've got better situations in two of most of the important aspects of, I guess, countries. University and healthcare.
England is an extreme example, and it is more of an example of how not to do it.
What's happening in France then?
France is on the opposite extreme. The services look amazing to foreigners, like the fact that every mother gets a nurse assigned to her by the government to help her out through the first 2 to 4 years of motherhood, until her kids are old enough to go to kindergarten, which, in France, is also government funded. But what Michael Moore and others who praise the French system don't show you is the enormity of costs and the size of the apparatus behind this system. France, on average, spends between 12 to 15% of its national budget on its healthcare system. Every French citizen is required by law to pay into a national health insurance fund, the amount of the fee being determined by the individual citizen's income. France also has taxes, for example on gambling and casinos, the revenue of which specifically goes straight into the national health insurance fund.
Damn.
The system, which is centralized and run by the Ministry of Social Affairs, Health and Women's Rights, only works due to the massive amount of funds and resources allocated by the French state to ensure its viability. It works because the French are willing to pay the taxes and fees required to make it work. And this is where we go from Americans having wrong impressions about public healthcare to their understanding of it being also somewhat flawed. Because the debate about a public healthcare system is about far more than silly pedantic meandering over whether or not it's communism. It's a debate over structure, taxes and social sacrifices made, as well as burdens upon the individual or society at large. Whenever I saw a Bernie Sanders or other US politician continuously talk about how much they want a public healthcare system, the only thing they ever talk about is how much they want it, how great it would be for everyone, but never about what it means for the country and how it would be structured, built or implemented. There are simply questions, however, that must be asked, like is the US government even willing to allocate 12% to 15% of its annual budget into such a system? How well would it bode with ordinary US citizens to levy additional taxes from them for such a system? Because the bottom line remains that taxes paid to ensure the functioning of such systems in European countries are not just levied from super rich, no, they are paid by everyone. So in the end, this is a tax burden that will come down on ordinary working people just as well. And if you do not have this conversation as you campaign for public healthcare, you will eventually be forced to having this conversation when you try to implement it through the legislature. Beside the financing and taxation aspect of public healthcare, there's an additional aspect never talked about in the US political debate. If you are an American and you have ever been to Europe, you may have noticed that Coke tastes different here. It's less sweet. The reason is that our governments regulate the contents of sugar and take an interest.
Well, I knew there was differences in certain things, but the Coca-Cola and stuff, they've got differences in sugar. I wonder if you could actually taste the differences, because Coca-Cola here tastes goddamn sweet. So the fact that it can taste even sweeter is kind of scary, because I drink Coke and I'm like, okay, this has got way too much sugar, but there's more sugar in Coca-Cola in the US. That must taste like flipping syrup on crack. What the hell?
Interest in how healthy or unhealthy the produce we consume is. Some countries, such as the UK, even have a sugar tax. Denmark has a tax on fat. Most European countries have high tobacco tax. Sweden has a very high alcohol tax. European countries have the strictest regulations on food quality in the world. Even beyond just the simple what we eat and drink, it is also how we buy that is regulated. The UK, for example, banned the advertising of candy and sweets using cartoon characters or any other advertising method.
So this is where he went. Is it Tony the Tiger? For Frosties. Oh, that was the best cereal, man. Frosties Cocoa Pops. The Nesquik little brown balls ones. I don't even know what that's called. There's a few. There's a few that I don't think are in like other countries. Like one called Crave. I don't think that's in the US. But yeah, man, banging cereals, man.
That specifically targets children. Outside of food, there are government incentives and initiatives to keep citizens healthy, from subsidized fitness and sport initiatives down to extensive fitness programs for school kids. Why? Let's leave Europe for a great example for why. Japan has a public healthcare
Here we go. Japan, I didn't know, but we're going to learn now.
System. It is one of the best healthcare systems in the world in terms of quality and efficiency. Japan is also the country with one of the world's best healthcare systems that spends the least money on it.
What?
Because Japan also has the healthiest population in the world.
Oh. Well, there we go. That is fascinating as hell. I mean, I knew Japan is just like quite ahead in a lot of ways, but I didn't know it was... obviously, it's interlinked, right? If you're healthier, you're going to need the hospital less. But that much of a contrast, it's crazy how much difference that makes. God damn.
Once you have a healthcare system that is financed by taxpayers, the taxpayers, and by that extent the government, have a vested interest in the health and well-being of the taxpayers. Or rephrased, if you are morbidly obese in the United States, it is your responsibility, or should I rather say, your lack of responsibility. It will reflect itself within the costs you pay to...
Yeah, I mean, that's true. If you are, the heavier you are, or the more unhealthy you are. If it's in your control, then the more you spend, it's kind of on you. But if it's not in your control, that's where it's like a problem, you know. Because if you're someone who's genuinely just unlucky, you've been born with a defect or whatever it is, and you're having to pay and all this sort of stuff, it's like, okay, that is very sad. If it's on you, obviously it's still a shame to a certain degree, but it's on you. You know,
whatever insurance company you sign up with, you pay the consequences, not just in diabetes and cardiac arrests, but financially. In a country with a public health system.
But at the same time, also, maybe you're born into a family where you don't have certain foods and you eat a lot, just worse foods in general, junk food, because it's cheaper. And obviously, that's not on you at all. So there's a lot of things that can go into it that you can't really factor in.
System. If you are morbidly obese, costs, but financially. In a country with a public healthcare system, if you are morbidly obese, costs for your resulting treatments are paid by other people's taxes. It is consequently no longer just your responsibility. If you are fat in a country with a public healthcare system, you are a burden on society. And there's a question to be asked and answered of whether the people of the United States can even put up with such a standard. Personal responsibility and independence is at the core of the country's identity. Seeing your actions and your life within the wider framework of how they impact society at large is not necessarily something attractive to many Americans. Additional taxation on unhealthy produce, as well as a government-sponsored and encouraged incentive to live healthy lives, is also something that most Americans would probably not even accept. A few years ago, the former mayor of New York, Bloomberg, attempted to ban the biggest sized soda bottles in measures intended to incentivize healthy...
Look at the size of those fuckers, man. I couldn't even grab that. You have to hold that with both hands to walk out of the shop. Look at the size of those, man. Flipping hell. So this is the average size. This is like an Evian bottle, right? Just water. That is like 2.5 times bigger, maybe even more, maybe 3 times bigger. Flipping. And these bottles are big, by the way.
Be living for New Yorkers. New York, being a place that will probably be pro-public healthcare, protested that measure substantially to the point that it was rejected. However, in a conversation over whether or not to have a public healthcare system, such measures are part of the conversation that are simply unavoidable. Yet the proponents of public healthcare in the United States don't ever discuss this. American politicians who argue for public healthcare only ever say that they advocate for it, but never actually lay out any policy plan for how they would finance such a system or even what such a system would look like. But also more crucially, how they would incentivize Americans into being healthier. And that is an important conversation that must be had, especially when you keep in mind how unhealthy the average American is. A public healthcare system is not intended to be a daycare for obese people to continuously even out the consequences of their irresponsibility. And if you introduce a public option without incentivizing a healthy public, that is exactly what your healthcare system will turn into. I personally don't believe a federal centralized public healthcare system like in France would work in the United States. The country is too big, the bureaucracy would be too large, the taxpayers unwilling to pay, and the political landscape unwilling to put up with such. In France, there is a consensus amongst both sides of the political aisle to ensure the healthy state of their healthcare system. That bipartisan consensus does not exist in the United States.
In the US, could it possibly be state by state, or is that not really a possibility for healthcare? Because a lot of things are determined state by state, right? Could certain states have it, and then maybe if they test it out in those states, they can... I don't know. Is that a possibility? So say, I don't know what states want it. They would want a public healthcare, and what states would... I mean, I guess some people from all states would, and some people from all states wouldn't. But I'm just sort of trying to see the... So he said New York would, but then they tested something that wouldn't work. Let's just say they tested it in New York, and then maybe it moved to California, and then... I don't know. Could they just have certain states who want it to have it, and then certain states that don't want it to not have it? Is that not possible? I don't know. Maybe because it's healthcare, it's a bit of a different topic, but they do it with other stuff, so I'm assuming they could possibly do it, but I went back.
States. If a Democratic president were to introduce it, it would only exist until the next Republican president comes into office. Additionally, I don't believe a centralized federal healthcare system is even desirable. The system I prefer the most is one you got a taste of in the beginning of this video. Countries such as Germany and Austria employ a system in which healthcare is federally mandated and even subsidized, but implementation of the system is largely handed over to the individual states.
There we go. Damn, Germany is just ahead of a lot of things, you know. I feel like Germany is just so advanced in terms of a lot of other places in Europe, especially England and Austria too. I've been to Austria; it's a nice place. It is a really nice place, to be fair. But fair enough, man. They're quite similar in culture, Germany and Austria as well, I think. So it makes sense.
I don't believe that a top-to-bottom federal healthcare mandate would work in the United States. And what I would propose to Americans who wish to have such a system is to abandon the idea of a federal public healthcare program. The legalization of cannabis shows how reforms are best implemented within the United States, namely through legislation in the individual states to then convince those in other states of the viability of the reforms. Okay. I believe it would be better for the American advocates of public health in the United States, namely through legislation in the individual states to then convince those in other states of the viability of the reforms. I believe it would be better for the American advocates of public healthcare to campaign for public healthcare in their home states through state legislature and the governor's office. Not only are such efforts more likely to bring results, but would also achieve a public healthcare system without the consequent possibility of having the federal government step in and dismantle it if those in power of it oppose it, as the centralized British government would have done to Scotland if they hadn't retained control of their healthcare service in 1999. Such a regional system is also more efficient and more in touch with the people within the comparably smaller state it has to serve, and the advocates of a public healthcare system would also be more in touch with their own communities, and therefore it would be easier to debate and implement subsequent other measures incentivizing healthier living and finding the revenue source for the system.
Well, there we go. Bit of a look into this. I mean, it's an interesting topic, right? Thank you, an actual European that doesn't make fun of our stereotypes and actually genuinely brought up something to the table to help us. My throat is fucked, man. The NHS England may be the laughingstock of public healthcare, but I'm still bloody grateful it exists. I mean, yeah, it still helps me in a lot of ways, like, yeah, and the fact that I now know that in terms of in Europe, the NHS is pretty. It's not great. I mean, it's still again, it does the job in a lot of ways, and if it's like serious situations, it will help people, but it can be better. Anything can be better, right? And yeah, there are definitely problems with the NHS now because of them cutting funding and all that sort of stuff, and putting it into other things instead. And remember, as bloated as France's spending on healthcare is, their per capita healthcare expenditure is still only half of the US. As a Scot, thanks for the clarification that Scotland runs its healthcare far better than England does. I didn't know that, to be fair. It's a bit shocking that the most efficient way to portray countries and their people's traits is by country balls. French person here, Americans pay more for healthcare in their current taxes than we do. Oh damn. But yeah, this is a look into this. Let me know your thoughts. Obviously, people disagree on this and all that, but yeah, let me know your thoughts, and if you'd want it to change, if you like it how it is, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's that. And then until next time, subscribe. Peace.